Okay, how you doing this week, Ingrid?
I'm doing pretty good, Flo. A couple of stressful situations, but right now things are more stable, so I'm doing
That's
pretty
good to
good. What
hear.
about you?
That's good to hear. I'm pretty good. I'm kind of watching the sky darken a little bit out the window. So, yeah, another episode where we open talking about the weather and freaking out about what it's going to do to us. Okay, but I think maybe the rain will just provide some interesting ambiance, right?
Yeah, it'll sound good, like ASMR.
Yes. Yep, or some gothic vibes. Okay, so this
Awesome.
is our fifth writers' room meeting, I believe, and we are going through some feedback. I would say some feedback because uh, we have one listener who has been kind enough to send us an email that is quite extensive and has categories and subcategories and like dot point hierarchy. Like there's one level of dot points and there's sub dot points and there's headings. So I think we'll probably go through that. Shout out to Jace. Very much appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, you will forever be known as our first listener, and I don't know, our first caller. I don't know if we can use that
Yes.
word because we're technically not
Our
calling, but
our
our
first
first.
bonus colleague. Bonus colleague. We'll
Yes.
workshop what we call it. Contributor?
Yes, thank you very much for your contribution, Jace.
Okay, so I'll just read out the kind of intro to their email. They write, "Hello, hello." That's a hello for each of us, I think. "Hello, hello. I really like yours podcast and your ideas, especially the bisexification of Caroline Forbes, our Lord and Savior. And I have been made aware of the fact that I can ramble about some of my own odd ideas, so I have decided to inundate you with my thoughts. You might have discussed some of these slash something similar, but I love hearing you all hash out your thoughts. I hope you enjoy. I will do my best to break this up by category for your sakes." And I would say, Jace, that you did break it up by category for our sakes.
And
So thanks
we
for
are very grateful. Yeah.
that. Okay, so our first category here is powers, which is cool because I think we kind of opened with a bit of lore talk as well. So their first point is there was a lot of cool lore for the doppelgangers, but it could have been cooler. I think that Elena is often stripped of choice in her narrative, uh, and that is tied into the fact that her doppelganger blood is useful to everyone else but her. I think there are several directions to take this idea in, and then they have listed some points below that. Do you have any like first minute thoughts about the this idea that I think is really interesting and something that we haven't discussed yet? This idea that her blood is useful to everyone that isn't her. Do you have any thoughts about that, Ingrid?
Yeah, I thought it was like really, really galaxy brained. I don't know why they didn't explore it more on the show because I don't know. Blood isn't as significant on the show as you would think. There's the idea that vampire blood can heal you, but besides that, I don't know. They don't do a lot of fun things with it, and I really like the idea that the doppelganger blood can like amplify powers or can be like attractive to vampires particularly and can be I don't know, that she can use that to her advantage in some way. I think
Hmm.
that's a really cool thing to explore.
Yeah, I think it also plays into the statement about her agency and what she is and isn't able to do. So I think that's cool. Okay, their first point is Elena is a cunning character. This trait is often repressed in her narrative, but it is present. What if this was taken further? What if she actively investigated the uses of her blood and began using it as a bargaining tool? This would make parallels to Catherine more pointed. Not only do they look alike, they also share what is perceived as a negative trait, being manipulative in one way or the other. This would also give Catherine more characterization, as Elena's morals becoming more grey and her view more jaded would give us insight into the trials that Catherine would have had to face to push her into being the person she is in the present day. I think that's
That's
cool.
great. Definitely
Yeah.
the idea of I don't know. She witnesses this process happen to her, like as she slowly becomes more jaded and more cynical, and I guess that adds another layer of conflict within her that she's going to try to avoid that, but
Mm.
inevitably that becomes difficult, like with all the
Mm.
circumstances in her life. But because she has that point of reference in Catherine, she's going to try so hard to not become that. I think that's really cool.
Mm. I think it also kind of throws a spanner in the works of Elena growing to a point where she appreciates her own life and wants to protect herself and wants to survive, because Catherine really is very much focused on that. She's in that place already, and that's almost fundamental to her villainy, I suppose. So I guess it's interesting to see what that looks like for Elena to grow into that frame of mind, given
That is
her
some
perspective on
symmetry. Yeah.
Catherine. I love some narrative symmetry.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of symmetry and doppelgangers, the second point is doppelgangers remember past lives. I think this is their suggestion, that they would remember their past lives. It could be extremely vivid, or it could be something more like Avatar, with their avatar state and having to contact specific past lives. I think when I say I, this is them speaking now. I think if it was also made a trend that these lives were often cut short because of their magic blood, that would be super interesting. I like to think that the longest lived past life was a pirate that lived to be about 34 years old. Pirate, because lesbian pirate past life. Let's go, girls. Thanks, Chase. I think if the doppelgangers shared looks, sometimes personality traits, and this magical connection and nothing else, in brackets, sexuality, gender, career interests, that would also make this concept even cooler. The idea that each doppelganger is their own person would emphasize the concept of choice in Elena's character arc. What do we think about
Oh,
that?
oh, that's interesting. Usually, when there's any sort of mention of past lives in any narrative, the idea of memory is super present. So the person would
Mm.
have memories of their past life, and that informs their current personality. So I don't know. I'm reminded of, I don't know if this is, it's related, but I'm reminded of Penny Dreadful in the beginning, where
Mm-hmm.
Proteus, when he is revived by Dr. Frankenstein, he starts to have memories of working on a ship, of being a fisherman, and
Mm.
that wasn't explored fully because of plot reasons, but um, that's usually the direction that it goes, but it sort of perpetuates this idea that um, it's the same person with just like slight variations over the course of history. And I do like the idea
Mm.
of it being completely different people. Um, yeah, I do. I love that actually. And
Mm.
the idea
I
of
think,
a pirate is pretty cool too.
yeah, it is definitely. I think that um, it's interesting to me that the only character who has, to my knowledge, or to my memory, the only character who's really had this kind of collapse of self into experiencing memories and experiences from somebody else is Bonnie and Emily.
Hmm.
It's interesting to me that that's a point where we would make that parallel really explicit in terms of Bonnie's dreams and her nightmares about Emily's experiences and then being possessed by Emily, but we don't go that route with the actual doppelgangers. Like, I'm just going
Yeah.
to put that out there. That's a little bit strange to think.
Hmm.
So I think it could be cool to do that, and it obviously means that there's a lot of space open for different versions of the doppelgangers, because it's just Stefan and Elena, from what I understand, just them being doppelgangers of Silas and
And Catherine.
the lady
Yeah.
that he was
Yeah.
into.
Yeah.
Um,
The
the
the before thing. Yes.
yes, that one. And just being doppelgangers of the original ones, and so that could always come forward. And it would be funny to kind of imagine what sorts of, like, is it really only the case this time that one of the doppelgangers chooses someone else romantically? Is that really this like a modern thread with Stefan, Elena, and Damon the only time that's happened? It would be interesting
Hmm.
to kind of dig into when maybe the Stefan doppelganger would make that decision, or when they would not be romantically involved at all, but still have a close bond. Like, it would be cool to dig back into that. So, the final point under this like doppelganger lore category is odd idea and not very good, but I enjoy contemplating it from time to time. Excellent intro. Elena literally weaponizes her blood. If her blood is an amplifier, why not use it? This line of thought varies from Vamps drinking her blood becoming stronger, so she lets Stefan/Damon drink her blood during fights, letting Bonnie use her as a way to make her spells stronger, using her blood in her own weapons, to literally poisoning herself and flinging her blood at people because her blood amplifies magical properties and things. For example, Elena drinks vervain, which makes her blood toxic to vamps, but it's Elena, so it's double toxic. Thoughts,
I love
Ingrid?
that. Yeah, I love that so much. I It gives Elena a lot more to do. Elena becoming a more active participant, even in combat, which is so
Mm.
cool. I love the idea of Elena like creating weapons and thinking about how she can incorporate her blood and becoming a vampire supernatural hunter, but with this added level of using blood and using blood magic, perhaps, or something like
Mm.
that. I just think that it's so cool. Like it's unparalleled. Like their
It's
mind
very
is
cool.
huge. But yeah.
Thanks, Jace. Uh, I I think that I am very interested in this idea, and have not this sort of in combat sort of weaponization, but have dug into this a little in my own personal work, this idea that the people you think of as being the prey in this supernatural predator-prey relationship can inherently, through the act of being fed on, become a weapon. So I think it's quite interesting to escalate it to the point of her weaponizing it, both in terms of the narrative and also in fights, just using her blood as a weapon. It also
Mm-hmm.
means that like she's basically, she doesn't have enhanced, in the period of time where she has no enhanced strength and she has no speed and she has no compulsion, she still has this specific power that doesn't allow her to harm humans, but it allows her to harm this very specific category of supernatural, which is really interesting. And also, what would happen when she becomes a vampire? Like, how would that work? Like, what if it's worse and really bad for her, and her body
Mm-hmm.
kind of rejects it based on her blood already?
Right,
That could
that's
be
interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
Or, I don't know, the Vampire Diaries does like to sort of play around with supernatural creatures and in creating like the hybrids and the tribrids and things like that. So maybe Elena could become another
Mm.
category of supernatural
The
creature beyond
Brids,
the
the
doppel.
Brids.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the
Yeah, that'd be
Brids.
cool. Speaking of tribrids, I do want to point out that blood is weaponized by Hope Michelson in Legacies, but I think it's interesting to take this from an angle of Elena being essentially non-supernatural in practice, except in this one specific circumstance, because Hope's kind of usage of her blood, it's also an example of her blood being toxic to just one. It's just to one guy. It's
Mm.
just to Malivore, but and she does make a blood knife, which is very, very sick. And I think that it would be cool if Elena paralleled that. We could set up a parallel in advance. That would be really interesting. Uh, but with Hope, it's kind of caught up in all of this badassery that exists already in her and that we expect as a viewership because of her parents and because of where she came from and because we kind of watched her grow up. Whereas in Elena, it's so interesting to make that pivot, even very suddenly, into her realizing that she actually has this advantage
Hmm.
over people.
And and it would be cool for Elena to be the catalyst, like the first person to develop this, I don't know, fighting style, this strategy, I guess, and then
Mm.
Hope later on would be inspired by that and uh,
Yeah,
take Elena's story into account. I think that'd be cool.
that would be cool. Klaus would be so pissed off.
Yes, that's what I want.
Okay, so the final point, so that was all the doppelganger lore that they suggested, but there's a one final point under the powers heading. I really appreciate the hierarchy, Jace. I'll just reiterate that. I love a good structured breakdown of things. So the final point under powers is pushing the envelope on what a vampire is. Vampire Diaries follows a rather common description of vampiric powers, but I like exploring things beyond that. What we do in the shadows has really inspired my thoughts on this. What if how a vampire felt when they died affected the type of vampire they would become? What if some vampires were more tangible than others? This line of thought usually leads to me perceiving Damon as something of a dream demon. He feeds off of fear/anger/hate rather than blood. I really just like exploring how having different feeding needs would change the dynamics of all the characters. How Damon meets Elena for the first/second time could completely change. Maybe he comes to her in a dream as a scribbled dark figure that encourages her fears of Stefan or her paranoia in general, in a misguided attempt to protect her from the supernaturals around her, but also because he wants to mess with Stefan's life, and having his girlfriend be afraid of him is the perfect way to do that. So, thoughts, Ingrid?
Love it. Oh, so many thoughts because we did talk a little bit more about expanding the vampire lore within the Vampire Diaries and
Mm.
pulling a bit more from like the classic vampire literature. But this reminded me of something, and I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about my favorite thing, which is tabletop role playing games. It reminded me, yeah, it reminded me of a TTRPG called Vampire the Masquerade, wherein
Mm-hmm.
vampires are divided into families and they have powers and skills and abilities that are related to their family. So that's related to their bloodline, related to their lineage. So you have things like shape shifting into animals, changing their appearance in other ways, like becoming a different person in that sense. Psychic powers like telepathy, appearing in dreams, manipulating people's emotions. I think that's really cool. Like manipulating shadows and fog, divination, like
Mm.
straight up blood magic beyond just the basic super strength, speed, enhanced senses, and things like that. So I do like the idea of there being different categories of vampires in that sense. Jace's idea is really cool, where it's based on the way that they died. It could also be based on their lineage, like based
Mm-hmm.
on
Which
which
Michelson they
bloodline
come
they're,
from.
yeah, exactly, which bloodline they're from. But I think that might be a
Maybe,
little bit too limiting. But so
yeah, potentially, but it could be tied up in how each of the Michelsons died, potentially. Like if we
that
took that a
would be
little
cool.
differently.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're, because they really are the genesis of this species, and so the point at which, I mean, it we can do whatever we want, and we could just say that, you know, things evolve over time, and you kind of
Mm-hmm.
split up into sections and subsections of bloodlines and acquire specific abilities. I think they do that with the werewolves eventually. But it could be the case that we twist the kind of Michelson origin story a little bit, and because in that moment the spell, it's the first time that spell has been done, to our knowledge. It's the first time that people have been killed and brought back to life in this way specifically. And there
Mm-hmm.
really was like, they didn't know what would happen. They didn't know that they would then have to feed on blood. They didn't know all these different things. And so I think that it would be kind of reasonable to expect maybe some slight differences between the bloodlines and that sort of thing, which could be interesting. Do you think we'll eventually do a villains only episode and then talk about the Michelsons for 75% of it?
I would love that actually, because I would like to think a little bit more about which Michelson would sort of develop which
Mm.
subset of vampire powers, like based on the way that they
Yeah.
died or based on their personality. So I would actually love that, to think a little
Mm.
bit more about that, and to also read up on the Vampire the Masquerade wiki, which is
Mm.
super useful, just like the Vampire Diaries wiki. So shout out to
Mm.
all of the wiki contributors out there. You're
Mm.
great. You make this
Yeah.
podcast.
I don't think we would have attempted it if we had to rely on our own knowledge. Or God
Absolutely
forbid,
not.
rewatch everything all over
Oh
again.
God, no.
Maybe we can have Cole fly, but he still believes the Earth is flat.
Yeah, definitely. That's gonna be
It,
like weird out of context, because
yeah, this is a deep cut because it requires
it's
people
a
to be
deep
spying
cut.
on our conversations outside of here, where we've decided that
Yeah,
Cole Michelson definitely is a flat earther.
yeah.
Okay, so back to Jace's email. They have a heading called Different Dynamics, and under that, they have written Elena is the weakest character in the main cast, hands down. I don't mean in terms of power, but in terms of characterization. I think if Bonnie and Caroline were the main characters and Elena was the side character that constantly caused conflict, it could be really cool. Caroline is a perfectionist, and having her as the main would allow us to explore her struggles to keep herself and the lives of everyone around her as perfect as possible. She's also one of the morally strongest characters, so seeing things from her point of view would provide natural and not just frustrating conflict with the other characters, particularly the Salvatores. Bonnie, as the main character, would give us so much, exploring how the loss of her grandma affected her, delving into the lore of this world. Bonnie is kind, although her characterization tends to be just self sacrifice, but she's also steadfast. Watching her want to give compassion but have to choose violence to protect herself and everyone else would be amazing. I think that Caroline and Bonnie are just so much more fascinating, and having connections lead back to them rather than be tied up in Elena 24/7 would allow the world more room to thrive. Thoughts, Ingrid?
I do like the idea of Elena, Bonnie, and Caroline sort of being equal protagonists in this. I think that replacing Elena with either Bonnie or Caroline would sort of change the show completely, I guess, because
Mm-hmm.
we would either have to incorporate either Bonnie and Caroline into the love triangle, which I guess is the main conflict of the show, and
Mm-hmm.
build their character around that, or completely sidestep that love triangle and abandon it. But then it's not really the Vampire Diaries; it's just like uh, another thing that has vampires. So
Mm.
I prefer the idea where the three of them are protagonists in their own way. So the focus is not just on Elena, but at the same time, I think that Elena is definitely the weakest character out of the three, but a character that I think is worth paying a little bit more attention to and developing, because I don't know, I like her as a character, I guess. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I think I do agree. I think that if we did remove the love triangle, I mean, it's a conversation of where I believe that you and I would probably still enjoy a piece of media that didn't have a love triangle. In fact, we
Mhm.
might prefer that. At what point are we talking about completely shifting the genre and the, I guess, basis for this story out of this idea that, at least for me, it would be that, oh, well, I've grown out of that love triangle situation. This is not directly related to what Jason said at all, but just me kind of picturing what it would look like to pivot away from the love triangle, and maybe feeling reluctant to do that, because I think that that would be prioritizing my own wants and needs. Which, I mean, what is a podcast except prioritizing your own wants and needs?
Of course, yeah.
But you know, to completely twist away from what it was supposed to be and what was compelling about it originally. Um, so I would be worried about doing that if we stepped away from Elena, totally. But I agree with Jace's reasoning here, and also the potential that Bonnie and Caroline has. And I think that Jace's suggestion about Elena weaponizing her blood kind of solves this issue in a major way.
Definitely.
Because I mean, it is it would be relevant to Elena and Caroline if Elena could weaponize her blood against vampires. It would be relevant to Elena and Bonnie's relationship if Elena suddenly becomes the solution to a lot of different things, in the way that perhaps Bonnie has been in the past. And it kind of rounds out that dynamic, I believe.
Definitely. I guess Elena using her blood as a tool for Bonnie's spells was an interesting point that Jace brought up that I think would be very cool, because at least it doesn't put so much of the responsibility on Bonnie to fix everything. I don't know, I don't want to say kind of nerfs Bonnie a little bit, but it gives Bonnie a little bit more of a weakness that is complemented by other characters. So the responsibility doesn't fall entirely on her shoulders, and we don't repeat the mistake of having Bonnie be the person who fixes everybody's plot lines. So I really like that idea.
Yeah, it means that Elena can be the solution to Bonnie's problems in certain circumstances.
Yeah, so, in certain circumstances, not all of them, but some of them.
Yeah, sure. Also, like, Bonnie's blood is still being used in Legacies, even though Bonnie isn't there. They somehow have a stockpile of her blood that they use every time they want to make a prison world. So it's interesting to me to maybe twist that around and use Elena, because it's like every time it comes up, I just feel like we are harping on and on about Bonnie's usefulness to solve other people's problems, even though she's not even there to have a storyline anymore.
Yeah.
Like, literally just there for the blood.
And they could used as a tool and not as a character.
Yeah, and they could easily twist, either bring a either bring a Bennett witch who is like somehow just has nothing to do with Bonnie. We didn't know that they existed before now, and use their blood because they're actually in the story, and could be brought into the story for that reason, and then have a character arc. Or we could just decide that something has changed, provides like a basic reason for it, and then stop deciding that Bonnie's blood is needed for them. But anyway, that's beside our point today. So the next section that Jace has written out for us is titled Different Locales/Ages. And they have written, if we have to keep Elena as the MC, we have to at least age them up, as you guys have already mentioned. College age is good, but I like to think of watching the show from the middle, after Caroline has become a vampire, after Bonnie has started learning about herself, after they graduate college and get jobs. Elena is mentioned as loving writing, but that isn't ever really made an actual part of her character in any way that affects the dang narrative. In this idea, Caroline is still a vamp, Bonnie is a witch, and Elena is a doppelganger. The difference is that Elena starts writing books, children's books, but some adult ones, that talk about life as a supernatural creature and how to deal with it. I think it could be interesting to play around with the conflicts this sort of narrative would create, where these three women are trying to help supernaturals despite the fact that this is a group that is underground. Thoughts, Ingrid? So I could just command you every time I finish reading out. I'm like,
it's a
thoughts
Pavlovian
now.
response at this point. Yeah.
I have my hands open. I'm waiting for you to drop some thoughts in them.
I think it kind of veers away from our initial idea that this show, this revamp, is kind of building on our nostalgia for that time. But since at the time it was set in high school, we decided it would be better to set it in college. So we could still have some aspects of nostalgia, like the classroom setting, all the sort of conflicts that arise from that, but with the characters more mature, and so we don't have to feel weird about all of the stuff that are in every CW show involving teenagers. So I don't know, making them like adults already in the working world kind of veers away from that, and I guess it would be cool to have a supernatural story where they're just working class, going doing their 9 to 5, grown up, things like that. But college, I don't know, I'm attached to the college idea. What do you think?
I think that I like the idea of the structure of a show starting with them all in the same place and not really able to leave. And then you can kind of splinter them off after that, which is why
Mm-hmm.
shows with kind of like that start in an institution. So either they're all on the same superhero team, or they're all in the same school, or they're all working the same jobs at the same place. And then you can kind of, if you want to, for drama, kind of introduce some friction and like throw them together so that they bounce apart for a while. I think that there's a lot of usefulness in that kind of structure. And I do think that it's part of the strength of the Vampire Diaries is crossing that threshold into adults and that kind of viewer anxiety about what that will look like. I wonder if we start in college and I think Bonnie has already started. I think we decided that Bonnie already knows she's a witch. Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And maybe Elena doesn't know that she's a doppelganger. And I'm wondering if Caroline becoming a vampire could be moved up, or potentially she is a vampire and she doesn't tell them for a while. Might be an interesting take to
That
like
would that
kind
would
of
be
meet Caroline
interesting.
in the middle. That might be fun to play around with. Even, I mean, Stefan and Damon would be able to tell that she was one. So it would be hard to keep that totally secret. Like if we did, we would have to have that happen when Elena maybe doesn't know that Stefan and Damon are vampires either, which is like the first few episodes, and that's it. So that might be a little bit too soon, but we can kind of play around with that over time. I think this idea of them trying to help supernaturals despite the group being underground is really interesting, and Elena writing books for children about how to cope as a supernatural creature is like really touching, I think. And if we did end
Mm-hmm.
up at the place where the school exists, the Salvatore boarding school exists, for like Elena, that would be like a
Oh, that's great.
distribution point for that. So like
Yeah.
she, even if Elena wasn't in Legacies, this iteration of Legacies that I'd imagine we
You would
won't
like
ever
have
get
her
around to
books
fully mapping out.
there as like a little Easter
Yeah,
egg, I guess.
yeah, her books are
Oh,
there
that's great.
because you're going to rage about this, but there is actually one book in the Salvatore School that was written by somebody there, and it was written by Alaric Saltzman. And guess what it's called?
What is it called?
It's called Klaus, the Great Evil. You know, at the school that his daughter goes to, there's a book in the library called Klaus, the Great
The
Evil.
Great Evil. The Great
Yep, that all
Evil.
the students read and then know about. And that's what Alaric Saltzman decided to do with his time.
It's like an
Love that guy.
obligatory part of their curriculum. Like it's required
Yeah,
reading for everyone
yeah.
to learn about. Okay,
Mm.
that's cool.
To learn
That's
about this
great.
one student's family and how damaged her family is. Excellent.
Yeah, I like the
Okay.
idea of it kind of reminded me of Anne Rice's novels, where The Interview of the Vampire is a novel that actually exists in universe,
Mm,
where people in general don't really believe that it happened, but it's like it's there, it's open, so all the vampires who are in the know get to read it and sort
that's
of
so cool.
laugh
Yeah.
about it. So
Yeah, because you'd
that's an interesting idea.
like it is interesting. Like if you had kids and you suddenly came upon in like a secondhand bookstore this little children's book about you know, I I have two mums and they're both vampires. Like
Mm-hmm.
you would read that and think it's cute. You'd think that like it's the point that it's making is that like you would think that the vampirism is also kind of like a vehicle for trying to help kids to, not that because kids really need a lot of help, but to try and make sure that kids are exposed to and assisted in understanding uh, gay relationships and like having two mothers. Like
Yeah,
you would just
they'll
think that like,
assume
oh, the
it's a
vampire
metaphor
thing
for
is like,
something else. Yeah.
yeah, like this is how we're teaching our kids acceptance. That would be like that would be really funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I do think that would work, and it's cool to end up there, even if Elena doesn't spend all her time doing that, even if she's still a doctor or something like that. It puts her writing ability into practice, so I like that a lot. Thanks,
Mhm.
Jace. Okay, and so Jace's other point about different locales slash ages is Bonnie as the leader of a coven, still in Mystic Falls, but anything centering around Bonnie is aces. So, like in that location, Bonnie is kind of like the leader of the witch community. Ingrid, thoughts?
I like the idea of Bonnie eventually becoming the leader of a coven. So uh,
Mm.
she starts out in college. Uh, she's still figuring out her powers. She knows that she's a witch, but she's. I think we talked a little bit about her going like outside of Mystic Falls to other towns, other cities across the country, and sort of gathering information from different covens and bringing that back to Mystic Falls. So I like the idea of her powers growing and then her knowledge growing as well and becoming a leader of a coven in that sense.
I agree. I think that uh, it's interesting for Bonnie to have a place of power in the Mystic Falls community. Ultimately, it would be. I mean, it would be cool to think about her potential love interest and whether or not they would also be a witch and what kind of role they might play in that community as well. And like some kind of power couple arrangement would be excellent. Because I think, well, at least
Yes.
I argued for, but I think we decided that they would ideally have a very strong personality, because that would
Mhm.
kind of and be kind of like entrenched in the story as well, not just a side character that is occasionally appearing to hold Bonnie's
Mhm.
hand. So that could be cool. I think it's nice to end up there, and it cements her in Mystic Falls. Like I feel like Bonnie's ending. Like obviously we think that a lot about Bonnie's story was a cop out, but I feel like her traveling the world is a reason, first of all, to not have her present in the town while they still have
Mhm.
other characters who are in the town in ongoing spin offs. And also, like, this idea that she loses someone she loves and then leaves behind all the people that know her, and that's freedom. I mean, I don't really see why so many people get happiness fixed in place. Like Matt is the mayor, and Elena and Damon have stayed in Mystic Falls to raise their family, and like so many people get joy out of being near other people and being fixed in place. And so it is interesting to me that I think Jeremy also is just he's a hunter, but he kind of helps out at the Salvatore school as well. Like people have ties to place, but Bonnie doesn't, is weird
Mhm.
to me.
Yeah, that's
So
that's what I was gonna say. Like, it just confirms the idea that Bonnie has no real emotional connection to Mystic Falls, beside the fact that she grew up there, like for plot reasons, because the plot is set in Mystic Falls,
mm.
and they need her there to advance the story. But she has no real reason to still be there, and that's why at the end, like, oh, she's going to travel the world, I guess.
But they'll still have her
But would
blood,
yeah,
so she doesn't have to be
yeah, they'll still
there
have her
to be
blood,
there.
but it would have been better to like not to trap her there, but at least
Mm.
to create a community around her, I guess, for her to
Yes.
insert herself as part of that community in a more significant way.
Yes, exactly. And I would like to also point out that because you haven't seen all of the originals or any of
I have
Legacies, I
not.
believe,
Nope.
on the originals, they have a plot line with. They basically announced that werewolves all come from a spell that was
Hmm.
cast in a specific Native
Yes,
American tribe.
you told me
And so
about that. Yeah.
they essentially do a Twilight, even though this was probably the one point where they were edging out Twilight in terms of issues with their content, was not having racist depictions of Native Americans, oversimplified versions, and stories that involve Native American lore and
Hmm.
spirituality that has twisted it to do whatever they want while also not having main characters who are Native American. But they have a character called Inadu, who is the like I believe she was in ancient times so powerful that her tribe killed her, because but they are also the ones who made her powerful. Like it's very convoluted, and she is split into pieces. But and then when her bones come together, she can then reform and kind of bring her body back and also possess people and stuff like that. And so they have her as this power, and she's also referred to as the Hollow. She's in season 4, and she's a huge. She's the big bad, and then they split her power up into 4 and put her into 4 people. And then in the 5th season, when they bring that power together again, she's not there. So they have her power present and she's gone. To me, I mean, obviously there's a huge difference between the role that Bonnie is playing and the role that Inadu is playing, but they're both kind of through what they are manifesting conflict and issues. And then at some point, they're just not there anymore, but we
Hmm.
still have parts of them. We still have their spirit, but they're not there. We still have Inadu's spirit, but she's not there. We have Bonnie's blood, but Bonnie isn't there. So for me,
Yeah,
like
which is
it's
yeah.
quite strange. If I had a penny
It,
for every time a woman of color was off with barely any explanation, but her power or blood was still there, I'd have 2 pennies, which is not a lot of money, but it's weird that it happened twice.
Exactly, and I guess this is a conversation that we could have about like the commodification of women of color and women of color's bodies, but I think that would be a
Hmm.
little too deep for for
Our
one, a
feedback
Vampire
episode.
Diary. Yeah, and for a Vampire Diaries podcast, and also for a Vampire
Yes.
Diaries podcast run by two
Mhm.
white women. So that is a
Okay.
conversation to be had.
God. Yes, definitely. Okay, so the next point on this is the final heading in Jace's email, is fixing weak characterization. So the first point under this heading is letting the characters, especially the women, have interests outside of their constant struggle to survive and self-sacrifice. Let Elena like her writing slash poetry. Let Caroline tutor and read to kids. Let Bonnie just blow shit up. Why should she not be a pyromaniac when she can essentially set fire to things with her mind? I think having the romances sidelined a bit would allow the focus to rest on the trio of girls slash women and thus allow them to grow. What do you think, Ingrid?
I like the idea of Bonnie blowing shit up. I think that's what she should do. But yes, if we sideline the romance a little bit, because the show focused a lot on that, if we focus a bit more on the relationship between Elena, Bonnie, and Caroline, I think that would be a lot better.
Agreed. I think we're just constantly circling back to this point of the three of them as tent poles
Mm-hmm.
and as central characters. I wonder if there's a special term for when you have three protagonists. I'm going to Google it. What is it called when you
There must be.
have three protagonists?
Are we already like on an ensemble situation here, or is
Yeah,
three still
potentially.
too few?
Okay, are you ready? It's very obvious and we should have known. It's called
What?
tritagonist.
Tritagonists. Okay. All right. That
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah,
Tribrids, tritagonists.
yeah. But the two having two main characters is deuteragonists.
Which does not sound as
No,
cool. Well, it
not
sounds
quite.
cooler, but it's a lot harder to say.
Yes. Okay, so the second point under this heading is the show often shows Elena making a decision, in parentheses, the right one even, and then being undermined by Damon and then Stefan and Elena having to struggle to fix it. I think it would be team building and great characterization to have them all gang up on Damon for a good old slam dunking. Just Caroline and Bonnie and Elena smacking him around between them like a beach ball, and Stefan cheering them on in the background. I think that would be good. And then in brackets, I think Damon is potentially cool, but can't get past the whole rapist thing myself. Jace, I don't know why you wrote a key smash here in the email that I'm reading out. um, Sad though Stefan isn't much better.
Oh.
Yes. Okay, very controversial take that Stefan isn't better than Damon. Ingrid, what do you think about that?
Ooh. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm still trying to get over the key smash part, but yes, I do think that Damon should be smacked around a little bit. I don't know if they mean literally, physically beating him up, but I like the idea. So.
I think that they make a really good point that a lot of Elena's decisions are undermined by people who
Mm-hmm.
are like older and more knowledgeable than her, which I guess could potentially be shifted a lot by this idea that she has this ability that nobody else does and that she might understand it in a way that nobody else does, and then
Mm-hmm.
kind of utilize that for her own purposes would be interesting. But yes, I do agree that Damon needs some slam dunking in both senses of the word, although I would want to make sure that we don't kind of veer into like slapstick territory where everybody is like just beating him up for like comedic purposes exclusively, and it may not fit with an emotional arc or something of that
Okay.
kind.
All right. I
But
will concede that that is probably the best idea, even though I think it would be great. It would be really funny.
yes, I think that Caroline deserves at least a good swing,
Yeah,
but maybe not
definitely.
Elena if they're ending up together. Okay, and so the final point under the fixing weak characterization heading is if Elena is the lead slash being doppelganger is the focus, I think giving her some distinctive quirks and Catherine some differing ones as well would really highlight them as their own people despite their differences. What do you think about those quirks, Ingrid?
That is a good question. That's something that I think it's been the most difficult part for me, making this podcast and being in this writer's room with you, is thinking of ways to make Elena unique and distinguish her from the other characters and make her
Mm-hmm.
lovable, I guess. Um, so I'm actually more interested in hearing any ideas that you have, because sometimes I usually like draw blank when it comes to this. Like,
Yeah, it's hard for me because I tend to not develop characters by themselves. I
mm-hmm,
tend to have a specific dynamic that I want, and then I develop those characters in a way that will create that dynamic. So like I'm pursuing a specific conflict or even a specific resolution, and so then I have to invent the conflict, and in order to invent the conflict I have to invent the kinds of characters that would create it. So like reverse engineer from like a specific moment between two people. So I think that it's not necessarily I mean, in terms of quirks, I'm very bad at quirks because they tend not to feed directly into that process. They tend to not feed directly into the narrative, but they're important things for characters to have. But it doesn't occur to me. I also, when I'm writing, I don't describe characters because I don't remember descriptions that characters are given in books, so I just don't write them. So like, just I'm very bad at anything that's not to do with that point that I have imagined is coming and trying to get there. So for making Elena unique, I guess my approach is to just figure out who we need her to have conflict with and then create issues with that. And as far as quirks, like I would probably just Google like character quirks and then pick some from whatever list is on a Pinterest graphic. Like
Okay, yeah.
that's my incredible character building blocks approach.
One possible cheat that we could have is just like to open up. This is me delving into the realm of tabletop RPGs, but you can sort of like roll the dice and decide what your
We should
character's
do
like
that.
flaws. Yeah, your character's flaws and personality traits. So I think that we could do that for Elena. Try to
Do you do
figure
you
out
want
something for
do you
her.
want to roll? Do you want to roll for personality right now?
Let's roll for
We could do that
personality.
later.
Okay.
I'm not very like I watched the programs. I watched the Dungeons and the Dragons programs, but I'm not
The
very
programs.
across like character
Uh-huh.
building. I have built one D&D character, and his name is Bard Simpson, but he's not a bard, and that's
Hmm.
it.
I love him.
And he tries to sell these like crystals that his mother told him are important, but it's basically a multi-level marketing scheme. That's it.
I love him. I love him. I don't know if this is a tangent that is too tangential for us to leave in,
we can
but
we can always cut it. We can always cut it.
yeah,
Um,
we can always cut it. But it's just like talking about D&D.
Welcome to our Dungeons and Dragons podcast. It's a Trojan horse. We've done the first 4 episodes on the Vampire Diaries, and this is our
It's
pivot,
actually
and
about
you
Dungeons
find
and
out
Dragons. Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons hiding inside.
Okay, so I could roll for personality for Elena, but we could also
Maybe she
just
should.
not do that.
Maybe she should be really funny. Is that a quirk? Is that she's
She could
really
be a
funny?
bard. She could be a bard.
Yes, but like not in the musical sense. In the like with her writing ability. Like maybe
Yes,
she's a slam
that is a
poet.
thing.
She does
Like
slam poetry.
there is a class of a subclass of bards that it's just like eloquence and speech and things like that. So I think that'd be
That's
better.
cool.
Yes, that'd
That's
be a
cool.
lot better for Elena actually.
If she's like very good at words,
Hmm.
no matter what, and maybe Catherine, in comparison, like Catherine's really sarcastic and stuff like that, but like Elena can kind of like outsmart her in conversation
Hmm.
and like twist her words around, and so that
Hmm.
like makes the kind of manipulation between the two of them a little bit more dynamic because they can just like
Oh,
fuck with each other.
I like that. I like
And
that
Elena
idea.
wins in a war of words.
Obviously.
Elena wins.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
we can move on. We can move on.
Okay, so that was our last point. Jace closed out the email saying, "Right, I think that's all I'm putting in this email." I like the foreboding nature of this this
There'll
email.
be another
Uh,
one.
well, I hope so because this is excellent content and we really appreciate it, Jace.
Hmm.
And I'm sure that there will be even more key smashes in the follow up emails if there are any. Uh, and they go on to say, "I rambled a lot, and I don't know if any of this is what y'all are looking for." Sorry, it's hard. I don't have an American accent. Y'all is very hard, especially when it's like a multi contraction. It's like y'all are. It just sounds like I'm making
Y'all
fun
are.
of you, Jace.
Hmm.
What you all are looking for, but I hope it was. Looking forward to your next episode. Thanks, Jace. So are we, because it's hard to find time to record. But yes, we really appreciate that.
Hmm.
And anybody else listening is also welcome to contact us at contact@revamppodcast.com.
You could also drop us an ask on our Tumblr, revamp-podcast.tumblr.com.
And those can be 100% anonymous, which is cool. Yeah.
So
So
I guess that's it for today, Flo. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much, Jace, for your wonderful ideas and contributions.
yes, thank you, Jace, and thank you to you, Ingrid. It's been nice hanging out.